You know, they're selling y'all wolf tickets, people. You're eating them right up.
Hey, pussy, are you still there?
I back. Trust me, I back.
But I'm not impressed by your performance.
You'll do nothing. You'll do nothing. Shut your fucking mouth, you'll do nothing. You'll do fucking nothing. Not one of you will do nothing.
I'll tell you what, bro. You know, I was out there, I was fighting all the hitters, bro. You ain't fought no hitters.
Come on, guys. It's normal.
I'm not saying I would fight you. I would kill you.
John, do you think you kill me, John? I mean, really?
No, don't be scared, homie. I'd like to take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody. The double champ does what the fuck he wants.
I am gonna beat you into the living death. I mean, maybe that's your job, but where I come from, you know, people like that get slapped.
That's fucking illegal.
Nick Diaz, you just shook up the world. How's that feel?
Hey, I'm not surprised, motherfuckers.
Yeah, this is a simulated death match. And you haven't simulated anybody's death yet.
I said it last year. We're not here just to take part. We're here to take over.
What is the game plan going in against him?
The game plan is you go in there, hit him with some good shit, don't get hit, and come home with a pocket full of cash.
Who the fuck is that guy?
Everybody's on steroids. The whole UFC, everybody.
I'm gonna go home tonight. I'm gonna drink a Coors Light. That's a Coors Light because Bud Light won't pay me nothing.
Do you want to be a fighter? That is my question.
Any of you radio personalities think you want smoke? Call me Mr. Chimney. I want smoke.
Yes. What is up? What is up, MCR family? Another daily edition of the show live on YouTube. Smash the like button, share the show, subscribe, listen on podcast form, drop that 5-star review, write that review out. The last one we have was a 1-star, so we need some more. We definitely need some more reviews because that shit is kind of depressing. Let's be honest. But anyways, digressing obviously to something that is not depressing. UFC on Fox 31, the end of the UFC on Fox era with Kevin Lee versus Iaquinta 2. I gotta admit, I like this fight. I really like this fight. It may not be the matchup I would have made, but as we get closer to it, I'm actually really excited. Plus, I think Iaquinta's always had lost, redheaded stepchild of the lightweight division, so it's nice to sort of have him be a little more active this year than we have seen him recently. Obviously, with him taking a lot of time off for his real estate company. But digressing from that, obviously we have Dana White on First Take, Oscar De La Hoya on the Luke Thomas show on SiriusXM. Both guys going at it through the media, and Oscar setting up a 3-round fight. I mean, Oscar, come on. Come on, man. What are we doing here? And of course, UFC 233 being canceled. Sorry. Moved around, arranged, whatever verbiage they want to use. It was canceled and canned. It's rather unfortunate because it was a LA card. Obviously, I'm from and live in LA. Would be nice to have a big pay-per-view card like that, to be honest. But of course, Ben Askren, Robbie Lawler, all the other fights on that card have been rescheduled to other events. I'm not going to break down where all the fights are going, but just so you know, that card is canceled. Obviously, we're going to get to it later on in the show, but call in 323-870-4051. Press 1 to get in the queue. Definitely want to hear you guys' predictions and thoughts on, obviously, UFC on Fox 31, Bellator, Brett Primus versus Michael Chandler 2, and, of course, Oscar versus Dana White. Goddamn. But anyways, let's get to UFC on Fox 31. A card that, from top to bottom, has some interesting fights. Even if you go all the way down to the Jared Gordon, Joaquin Silva fight, I'm intrigued by that on some level. I'm not going to break down every fight on this card because there's a lot of fights on this card that I admit I just don't care too much about. But the ones I do care about, Bobby Green versus Drakkar Klose, Jessica Rose Clark versus Andrea Lee would have been the fight I talked about, but I believe Jessica Rose Clark went to the hospital due to dehydration, did not make weight, so that fight was canceled this morning. Jim Miller versus Charles de Bronx Oliveira. I love that rematch. Sergio Pettis versus Rob Font. Edson Barboza versus the surging Dan Hooker, and Kevin Lee versus, of course, raging Al Iaquinta. Let's start with Bobby Green versus Drakkar Klose. A few years ago, I was really high on Bobby Green. I thought he had good boxing ability. I thought he had good head movement. I thought he was decent. I thought he had some good promise. It seemed like, one, he hasn't really evolved since he's gone up the rankings. That's why he keeps losing to a certain level of opponents, because he has never really evolved his game over the years. On top of that, we know that he's had issues outside the cage in his personal life, from family members dying, from himself, I believe, getting shot. He's had a tough road outside of the cage. So I think that sort of impeded his run, his athletic career on some level. Drakkar Klose, a guy that is very young compared to Bobby Green in terms of fight years. Bobby Green has over 30-something fights. Drakkar Klose has maybe 10. But Klose is a really powerful wrestler, powerful striker. Not really the most technical. Like, I really don't see him setting up his shots with the jab or a low kick that often. But he does lack in terms of fundamental technique. He makes up for it in athleticism and brute power. And added to that, Bobby Green can get clipped, can get hurt. I think Bobby Green's probably going to get knocked out in this fight in the first or second round. I think it's going to look fun and competitive until he gets caught with a huge overhand right or left hook, and Drakkar Klose is going to swarm him and not let up. And it will be a rather fun but short fight and win for Drakkar Klose, in my opinion. Moving on, Jim Miller versus Charles Oliveira, a fight and rematch that I'm intrigued by several reasons. One, both these guys are fantastic Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. Sub welterweight, sub 170, you can make the legit argument that they, in the last 10 years, have been the two best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners in the game. It's them too. And obviously I think Charles Oliveira has either the tie record or he has the record for most submissions in the UFC. So, again, just on sort of the accolades and credentials of both guys, we know the fight's amazing on the ground. On top of that, we know that Jim Miller beat Charles Oliveira in 2011, 2010. Let me get the exact date here quickly for you guys. So I have it. It was, damn, so far back. Where is this? They definitely, there we go. 2010. So 9 years ago, going on 9 years ago, these two guys fought. Obviously, Jim Miller is not the same fighter he was 9 years ago when he was on his run and close to a title shot. On top of that, Charles Oliveira is now back at 155. I think that's a better weight division for him overall. I think Charles Oliveira should win this one in a rematch. I think he's a little more of a fresher fighter at this point, even though he himself is a long-tenured veteran at this point. I still think he is less shop-worn than Jim Miller, in my opinion. I think that's probably going to be really the only significant factor between them. And again, Charles Oliveira, submission late, third round, maybe decision. I just don't see Jim Miller really being able to beat anyone of real note in today's age. I just don't see it. Like, just to go over for perspective here, Jim Miller beat Takanori Gomi, Joe Lazon, and Thiago Alves. All three more shop-worn than himself in 2016. In 2017 and 2018, he has not won a fight. Lost to Dustin Poirier, Anthony Pettis, Francisco Trinaldo, and Dan Hooker, and beat Alex White at the very end of this year. In the summer of this year. Alex White is not a Charles Oliveira. I think that's pretty much clear as day into why I think Jim Miller just doesn't have what it takes to repeat what he did nearly a decade ago. Sergio Pettis versus Rob Font. Sergio Pettis is one of those guys where he has so much promise, just like Anthony Pettis, just like his brother in a way. And he has just achieved so little in a way. Obviously, far less than what his brother has achieved. Obviously, Anthony Pettis being a lightweight champion at one point. Sergio Pettis has never claimed a UFC title. But Sergio Pettis is still a fantastic striker. I think he still has sneaky submissions, not nearly as good as his brother. His wrestling isn't nearly as good as his brother, and I think that's always been a huge problem to his game. Rob Font, other than being just a really scrappy guy, I don't think he's better in any category than Sergio Pettis. That's really kind of where I fall down on this fight. I think Rob Font can make this interesting. I think he could play spoiler. I think he could beat Sergio Pettis. But I'm definitely going to say that Sergio Pettis should be the clear favorite in this fight. Jay Project saying, weren't you the one who said Alex White was going to beat Miller back when that card happened? Yes, I did say that. But again, Alex White isn't Charles Oliveira. He just isn't. He isn't as shop-worn to be beat by... Oh, what's a good example? Well, okay, Jake, I know you're a boxing fan. Roy Jones, right? When he was fighting like the Bobby Guns of the world, right, in that last run, obviously that is a very low-level opponent. When he fought Dennis Lebedev, he lost, right, towards the end of his career. Dennis Lebedev still is a guy that is also faded, also a little bit older, but he was less old. He was less faded than Roy Jones at that time. I think that's a similar situation here. But yeah, he can beat, talking about Jim Miller, he can beat, the quote-unquote Bobby Guns of the world, but can he beat the Dennis Lebedevs of the world, meaning Charles Oliveira, who's still a veteran, but still a legit fighter in the division? I don't know about that. I again, you say don't sleep on Miller. I agree on do not sleeping on him, but Oliveira should be the favorite. He should win this one. Let's be honest. Moving on to the co-main event, a fight that I am highly interested in, Edson Barboza versus Dan Hooker. And again, Dan Hooker, a guy that has been surging, a guy that has 7 losses on his resume, but is surging right now. He has looked far better at lightweight. Definitely a testament to, hey, don't cut so much weight. You're actually a worse fighter when you're cutting that amount of weight. Again, I'm always happy when fighters prove my theory correct. Edson Barboza, though, he's a much different opponent than Gilbert Burns. He just is. He's a much different opponent than Jim Miller. He just is. Edson Barboza, my head is definitely telling me to pick Edson Barboza. I think he's the better striker. I think he has shown 100% better grappling throughout his career. Just being out-wrestled by Khabib doesn't mean that he's a shit wrestler. Edson Barboza has always been a decent grappler, and obviously phenomenal kickboxing ability. Dan Hooker is really going to need to get in his face and make Edson Barboza uncomfortable. Barboza needs to be at mid-range to long range to really get his kicking game going, to really get his rhythm going. We've seen Tony Ferguson upset that rhythm and pressure him, make him uncomfortable, push him up against the cage. We've obviously seen Khabib Nurmagomedov do that with more of a grappling-centric game plan. If you're Dan Hooker, again, you got to get Edson Barboza against the cage. He is less efficient there. He is a less special talent when his back is against the cage. So, double jab, triple jab, initiate grappling exchanges, tie-ups, anything to get Edson Barboza tired early and with his back behind that double black line in the cage. But I think that's a hard game plan. I think if we see Hooker get stuck in mid-range, it will be a major problem for him, in my opinion. Even though I think he obviously has great training with Israel Adesanya, and again, he has looked nothing but phenomenal as of late. This is a giant step up in competition. Jay, I think, echoing a lot of what I'm feeling, saying I've slept on Hooker too long, but Barboza is just a different breed. I agree. Like, Hooker is a talent. Like, I want to make that perfectly clear with what I'm saying. Hooker, I think with a couple more fights in between Edson Barboza, would have been 100% ready for an Edson Barboza. Right now, it seems like it was a jump up in competition level. And whenever I see that, it's concerning. And again, we've seen Hooker lose. Like, it's not like we've seen Hooker be this undefeated phenom. He's been surging. He's had a good run. But we've seen him lose. We've seen him lose to far lesser competition. than Edson Barboza. You know, he's fought, again, high caliber opponents like Yair Rodriguez, good prospect, good contender now, obviously, with that Korean Zombie win. But he's lost to guys like Jason Knight. Like, honestly, like this, if Hurker were to beat Barboza, it may be an indictment on Barboza's shop-wornness. You know, how much is he faded as a fighter? Because he's been in the game for a long time. I think we forget how long Edson's been around. That knockout of Terry Edom back in the day is going on a decade now. It is. So, again, it could be a passing the torch moment. Maybe Daniel Hooker figured everything out. The new weight class, everything's clicking. That does happen. We've seen Robbie Lawler do that, obviously. We've seen other guys do that, obviously. Sometimes people just click all of a sudden and they have another run. Andrei Arlovsky had that at one point. Alistair Overeem had that at several points where he got knocked out and come on to had a huge run since then. So fighters reinvent themselves. I'm not saying that's not an impossibility here with Dan Hurker. I'm just saying we haven't really seen it yet with this caliber of opponent. And from the way I think in a logical perspective, that is a huge red flag. I'm picking Edson Barboza slightly by decision, but I'm not comfortable with that pick at all. And I'm a big fan of Hurker, so I feel bad about it in some way. But Barboza, I'm a fan of you as well, so unfortunately, I got to do what I got to do. Moving on to the main event, Kevin Lee versus Iaquinta. A rematch from, God, let me get the exact year, because this one is a while ago. It was, to put it in perspective, Kevin Lee's UFC debut was against Iaquinta in 2014. So going on 5 years ago, half a decade ago. I think Kevin Lee has improved leaps and bounds, obviously, since that fight. That was his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That was his 8th professional fight. Iaquinta has been nothing but inconsistent since then, and that's where I fall down with this fight. I think if Iaquinta was active and constantly training, he would be a much different product now than what we see. He'd be much more of an elite fighter than what we see. He'd be more of what he claims to be. But he's not that. He's been inconsistent. He's been off, worried about his real estate company, and taking short-nosed fights against Khabib Nurmagomedov. I don't like that. While Kevin Lee has been nothing but active, has been nothing but fighting elite competitors, training at high-level gyms, and evolving his game. It wasn't long ago Kevin Lee was like a prospect Woodley, where all they really had was really good top-control wrestling. But obviously Woodley has evolved his boxing ability above that. His grappling ability has obviously improved as well. Same with Kevin Lee. His submission ability has improved leaps and bounds. His striking has improved exponentially. So even when I go back and watch this fight, it's so hard to really put it in perspective with this rematch because the time in between is not only long in terms of pure metrics. It was 5 years is a long time in combat sports or just sports period, let's be honest. But on top of that, Kevin Lee has changed so much since then that it's a different fighter. It 100% is a different fighter. This would be like saying, hey, if Tarek Saffiedine and Tyron Woodley fought in rematch today. Sorry, was it Tarek Saffiedine? Or was it Nate Marquardt? Yeah, no, wait. Nate beat Tyron Woodley. Hold up. Why am I not remembering that correctly? This is really bothering me now. I have to look this up. I apologize. I just cannot continue the show without me remembering exactly how that went down in Strikeforce. Shout out to Google taking its sweet merry time. It was Nate Marquardt. There we go. Who did Tarek Saffiedine fight for the vacant belt then? Because there was a vacant belt. Was it Nate Marquardt? Anyway, digressing from that. If Woodley and Marquardt were to rematch right now, who'd win? It's Woodley, right? Like, it's obvious, clear as day. And obviously, Nate Marquardt's much more of a shot fighter now than, let's say, Iaquinta is. But I think that same comparison is true today. These fighters are completely different now. Different scenario, different matchup stylistically. Kevin Lee should dominate in this fight. I think he's the better wrestler now. I think he's the better grappler now. I wouldn't argue that he's the better fundamental striker, but in terms of effective striking, he may be the more dangerous threat than Iaquinta, who has really good foundational boxing ability, really good jab, good leg kicks. But I see Kevin Lee just being the more powerful striker at this point and really being able to hurt Al. Not hurt him, but definitely rough him up. I see Kevin Lee being able to counter Al's jab, counter the leg kicks, go for takedowns, level changes, and by maybe the third or fourth round, lock up a submission. That's kind of what I'm thinking about in this matchup. Call in 323-870-4051. Press 1 to get in the queue. Definitely hear your thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, about this matchup and this card. Jay adding Saffiedine beat Mark right after he KO'd T. Wood. Thank you. That was such a weird... When Strikeforce was dissolved, that was just a weird time to be a fan. But anyways, digress from that rabbit hole I do not want to go down. I think it's a fun send-off for UFC on Fox. Obviously, UFC on Fox... I made this point on this show and on the Boxing Voice that the UFC on Fox era is such a gray area in terms of contextualization that I don't know even if after Saturday night we can really talk about the era and have a consensus about what the effects are, what the ramifications of it were, what it achieved, what it didn't achieve, how to make the sport better, how to make the sport worse. It's going to take years to really, I think, understand the ramifications of this Fox deal, both positive and negative. In the same era as the Fox deal, we've had the average pay-per-view number go down from the Spike era. On top of that, we've had the biggest pay-per-view of all time be in the Fox era with Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov for the UFC. So it's an era of extreme peaks and even more extreme valleys. And I think that's really where I come down on the Fox era, is that there was some great moments. It achieved some amazing things. It brought MMA to a different cultural prominence than what it was previously. It just did. I think that really can't be disputed. Did obviously Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, and others help? Of course, that's without dispute. But beside that, I think the oversaturation, negative effect it had is still being felt. And it's one that boxing is, I think, doomed to repeat its MMA's same mistakes, honestly. I know this is going to be just an MMA show, but to take it a little bit into boxing, just because, why not? Boxing is repeating, like I said, the same mistake that the UFC did. It has a huge, speaking of all these promoters, whether it's Matchroom, Golden Boy, Top Rank, whoever it may be, PBC, they have all signed massive TV rights deals that their stables, that the infrastructure of the sport, just cannot support it. 54 events on ESPN, 20 plus events on Fox. How many events on Showtime? 36 Matchroom events on DAZN. 10 different Golden Boy events on DAZN. We're talking about literally hundreds of events in a calendar year that only has 52 weeks. And the biggest stable in boxing only has 130 people. The UFC had over 500 people. I think at their highest point, they had over 600. They had over 600 fighters in their stable. And they could not compete with the market. Or at least with what the corporations wanted from the marketplace. They cannot compete with it. Or keep up with it, I should say. And once that happened, I think the demand for the product dwindled. Hopefully that doesn't happen in boxing. Hopefully that mistake does not happen again. And hopefully ESPN learns from it in some way. I'm skeptical of it because the business model allows for these corporations and the promoters, etc., to still make millions and millions of dollars But us, the consumers, I think, actually are the worse off for it. And I think that should be always the number one priority when we're talking about a market, an industry, and how it should run itself. It should be about how does it affect the consumer. Digressing from that bigger point, Bellator 212, Primus versus Chandler 2, the rematch. A fight that, obviously, if you're a Bellator fan, if there are Bellator fans. Oh, excuse me. Ooh. Oh. Wow, that sneeze just attacked me. Brett Primus versus Mike Chandler 2. If Primus was active since his win over Chandler, which was a huge upset at the time, I'd probably pick Primus. I think his wrestling was far better than Chandler's. I think he looked to be the much bigger opponent in there as well. His striking was on par enough with Chandler that there wasn't a discrepancy where Chandler could outstrike him and beat him up. But Primus has literally not fought since that win, and Chandler has done nothing but win since that. I'm picking Michael Chandler mainly due to activity and also due to the fact that the first fight was close. It was competitive. It wasn't like Brett Primus came out here and destroyed Michael Chandler. No, it was a close competitive fight, and he has not fought since then. That is a major concern. And I'll be honest, the rest of the card, not too interested in that much. I know Alejandra Lara and Juliana Velasquez is on the card. Interesting fight. Sam Cecilia versus Derek Campos. Interesting fight. AJ McKee on the card versus Daniel Crawford. No relation to Terrence Crawford. Always good to see AJ McKee. But other than that, yeah, let's be honest. Jason, how did you come to any conclusion after the fight? It was like 3 minutes. What fight? What are you talking about? Anyways, digressing. Well, look, 2.5 minutes and there was a doctor's stoppage. I understand, but it was competitive up in that 2 minutes. Like, we didn't see Primus go out there and knock him out. That's sort of my point. Jay, like it. When you only have that sort of fight, you can't come out and say, yeah, Primus definitely has the edge on Chandler, especially with the layoff. That's sort of my point. Maybe I mischaracterized that as some like competitive, 5-round decision. Sorry if I characterized it that way, but yeah. Anyways, digressing. We're going out to the news of the day. Brett Okamoto with the breaking news a while ago, which I'm now reporting. Sorry about that. Saying the UFC is rearranging its pay-per-view schedule. UFC 233 will no longer take place on January 26th in Anaheim due to a combination of factors. That pay-per-view will change to another date, so 2019 will still feature the same amount of pay-per-views as originally planned. More info coming. Also in the Fox era, we've had how many cards be canceled? 3 or 4, I want to say, in the UFC. Before that, maybe 1. Maybe in like the Flash Entertainment era. But not in the Zuffa era. I don't think in the Spike era that there was ever that occurrence. Look, I think it would be, if I'll be honest, if they came out and said, look, we're just going to push off the pay-per-view, we're going to have one less pay-per-view on the schedule, I would be extremely happy. But I'm not. Because why? They're still planning on having the same amount of pay-per-views, same amount of cards per year. I don't like that. You need to cut down on this oversaturation. And I thought, when I first heard the news that this card being canceled, we'll obviously beef up the cards around it, which it will, but that's a short-term effect. We still have the UFC wanting to recoup that pay-per-view at some point and still have the same amount in this year. So the consumers are still going to pay the same amount this year as they did last year for pay-per-view. Nothing's really going to change. I think that is an issue. And I think the UFC needs to sort of start realizing that. I don't know how they do. Speaking of realizing something and no one else seems to be realizing it, we're going to go over to Dana White on First Take, saying some interesting comments about Oscar De La Hoya, and we're going to break down really why Dana White should not be the one saying any of this.
Oscar trailblazed, and then he made his opponents partners, Bernard Hopkins, Shane Mosley, and he established, so far, a lasting promotional outfit as a former fighter.
Did he do that? Did he do that? When you listen to this guy talk, do you really think that he did that?
Wait a minute, Dana.
There was a lot of smart people, and Richard Schaefer was the guy. You can ask anybody in the industry.
Excuse me, I kept saying Richard Schaefer.
The other thing is,
we don't need to hear the other thing, Dana. Look, the myth of Dana White needs to be exterminated. It needs to be stomped out. And before I really start talking about like the proposed fight that Oscar said and kind of joke about it, this point that Dana made about Oscar, like, did he really do it? Did Oscar really create Golden Boy? Or was it Richard Schaefer? Was it other people around him? Blah, 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 blah. When he himself is often credited, and he himself credits himself with the UFC's success. When Dana White has never been a majority stakeholder in the company. He has never been the owner of the UFC. He has been the voice and the puppet of Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta for near 2 decades. And now he is the puppet of WME ING. Dana White sold his ownership stake in the UFC, which was around 10% recently. So Dana White doesn't even have any ownership stake in the UFC. He's just the president right now getting a paycheck. So when Dana is out here getting all the acclaim, all the accolades that Dana was the reason the UFC turned around and came out of the $40 million debt and made the Ultimate Fighter show on Spike, and it was Dana, Dana, Dana. Guess what? Dana had very little control of the company, if at all. Oh, wait, he didn't have control of the company. It was Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta. So I see Jay saying, no, Matt, don't tell me you agree with Oscar with this whole thing. I don't agree with Oscar. I don't care about what Oscar's really saying. What I care about is what Dana's saying and how it's a flat-out Hippocratic statement. It is. The fact that Dana White has the nerve to get up here and question whether Oscar De La Hoya created Golden Boy Promotions when he himself has been falsely credited with the success of the UFC, I can't take it. I can't take that. Like, that is pure hypocrisy at its best, at its most Trumpian. That is it right there. And again, I don't care what Oscar has to say about Dana. The only thing I really heard about was the whole fight thing, I'll be honest. What I know is that what he just said right there, A, is a lie, and B, is just it's pure hypocrisy. The follow-up should be, well, Dana, you yourself had Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, Las Vegas casino owners with mafia ties, by the UFC, your buddies, put you in a nice cushy job where you got paid for decades, and now you're a multi-$100 million figure. Come on, man. Like, the hypocrisy is unreal. And Jay, you know the number, 323-870-4051, Jay. I think you're in Canada, I believe, right? Like, I forget where. But international line, Makes Combat Radio at gmail.com. Get that free international call-in link. If you want to call in and defend Dana White when he's nothing but a liar and a hypocrite,
I want smoke.
I got time today. I have all the time today. But moving more on the headline of the week, it seems. Let's go to Oscar De La Hoya sort of replying to that full interview. And again, go check out the full interview. I only played a very small snippet of it about that one point. Because again, I think that is a much bigger point we should make than whether Oscar or Dana should be fighting. The point should be, Dana, You are the one making these really baseless accusations when they could be turned right around to you. And again, when we start talking about the UFC and who has affected it, who has owned it, who has changed it, Dana White ain't on that list. Stop. Jay saying, no, I'm going to chill. I ain't going to do that today. Jay, I'm sorry. You have, again, a mischaracterization of what it is. Jay saying, falsely accredited by people on the outside, but people who know what knows, Dana was with the Fertittas, and it was a partnership. Look, a partnership is 50-50, right? So let's say you have Frank Fertitta, Lorenzo Fertitta, and Dana White. 33% all the way around, right? Nope. Dana had, at the highest level, 15%. And he, sold off parts of it throughout his tenure. But 15%, that's not a partnership. On top of that, if you talk to anyone, actually, that it's in the know, Dana White was a puppet. He would go out there and tell Fertitta, Zuffa talking points. That was his job. When any real decision needs to get made, it wasn't Dana White making those decisions. It was Lorenzo Fertitta mainly, and Frank, but mainly Lorenzo. And that is actually the people that know what and who know Dana, they will tell you that. It was really Lorenzo. And Frank did a lot of business deals, but Lorenzo on the day-to-day operations was running the UFC. Dana White was the puppet. He was the person that went out to the media and talked. I'll put in a comparison here, Jay. Lorenzo Fertitta is Donald Trump. Dana White is Sarah Huckabee Sanders. But instead of us obviously knowing that Trump is the one in charge, this would be like Trump saying, no, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is actually president. She's in charge. She's the one making all the decisions, not me. That's the dynamic we have. So, again, Dana White, yeah, kind of a hypocrite there, as usual. But anyways, let's go to Oscar's hilarious comments.
So, Dana White, ever the statesman, that was what he said in response to your request to debate.
Sounds defensive here. Jeez.
Your response?
Let's get in the ring.
Is that how you want to settle this?
Yeah, why not? Let's get in the ring. 3 rounds. Let's do this. Let's do this under Canelo, Cinco de Mayo. I'll even give you 5 months so you can get off the juice, and then we can get in great shape, and then we go 3 rounds. And look, I'm gonna give you a 50-pound advantage. It's okay. I can take you on. Let's do it.
The thing about battling with Dana White, you know this from years of having watched while you guys used to be on good terms.
Oh, wait, he's never laced up a glove in his life. Sorry about that.
Look, I gotta admit, Oscar won, right, this round. Jay, I know you're over there hating Oscar, but you have to admit, Oscar, that's a 10-9. That's close to a 10-8. That's a standing 8 count right there. Come on. Because what's Dana really have? The Richard Schaefer thing, which, does Oscar really care? Like, he still has Canelo. He still got his own deal. He's still making money. Like, Oscar's still making millions. Let's be honest. He's still good. On top of that, the cocaine shit, okay. So what? Yeah, I've done cocaine. You're on juice, Dana. You're literally on steroids. Anyways, I love it. Yo, Jay saying Oscar lost this whole thing once he said this, shaking my head. Nah, come on. Jay, you tripping. You are tripping, Jay. Come on. Yeah. Jonathan backing me saying, nah, Oscar took that big time. Call in 323-870-4051. Again, I think that's a clear 10-8 round for me. First off, you bring up the steroids, which I love, because that's always been an accusation with Dana. On top of that, you do something that's in the Dana White book. Dana White challenged his own fighter to a fight. Are we forgetting this, Jay? That Dana White challenged Tito Ortiz to a boxing fight. Remember this? And they actually did like promos for it. Like they put marketing dollars behind it. They had a weigh-in set up and all that. Come on, man. Dana White ain't above this. He's just on this level. Why? Because he's just as much of a promoter scum as Oscar is. They're two peas in a pod. That's why they hate each other. But Oscar definitely won that verbal exchange. Let's be honest. Come on. Digressing from that, we're going to move on to some more news of the day. California Commission. Jason, why are you bringing up old shit? Because it's relevant to this story in some way, let's be honest. California Commission and USADA are not getting along with this John Jones case. Definitely go read this article by Mark Raimondi and this interview on MMAfighting.com with Andy Foster, the head of the California State Athletic Commission. I have to admit, Andy Foster's always been one of the few commissioners that I have genuine respect for. I feel like he actually wants to better, the industry and better the sport and what he has jurisdiction over. A few things I want to read though. A few excerpts from this interview I want to read and sort of, break down with you guys listening. Because it's just, there's a bunch of interesting things here on a wide level of things. Quote from Andy Foster right now. We yielded executive discretion granted by the legislator of the state to a third-party drug testing company paid for by a promoter. It's a good thing, you heard me say. The UFC has done many great things by cleaning up the sport by hiring USADA, by doing these things. But the penalties, in my view, and this is key right here, but the penalties, in my view, they're not always consistent. And in any reason, it causes more burden for the fighter. They have to adjudicate with the commission, and they have to adjudicate with USADA. Sometimes those are the same, sometimes they're not. I say that because the process needs to be fixed. And I think that is 100% true. That the fact that we have, in a weird way, we have an attempt, it seems, by whether it's USADA, whether it's the UFC in conjunction with USADA, whatever it may be. You can even argue with the WBC and VADA in that aspect as well, that they are trying to circumvent the commissions. And largely, I understand the thought process behind that, because commissions are not all equal, especially in the U.S., and only talking about the U.S. right now. And I'm not talking about UCAD or the BBOC, because that's just really a different aspect, different scenario. But with these commission heads, California is a great commission. New Jersey, great commission. New York, not so much. Texas, not so much. Some states don't even have commissions. So when we do have a great commission, one that works really well, one that's innovative, like a New Jersey, like a California, ones that have tested with ideas on how to fix scoring, how to fix weight cuts, I like that. I think that's really smart. California Commission enacted a bunch of new policies on weight cutting and weight checks, etc. New Jersey has tested a lot in the past couple of years about judges not being ringside. They've been doing studies on that. That's innovative. I think without the commissions, with those respective commissions, we don't have those innovations. I don't think the promoters do that. I don't think for boxing with the sanctioning bodies, they do that. I don't see them as being the innovators of the game. When I see the USADA deal with the UFC, when I see the clean boxing program, I think those are Band-Aids. I think those are PR shields, legal shields in a way, for the sanctioning body, for the UFC, respectively. And those inherently do not solve the issue of PD regulation or whatever it may be. And on top of that, promoters and sanctioning bodies overall really aren't in the idea of bettering the sport. This is capitalism. They're in the idea of trying to make money. It's price fighting. I get that. So you need a third party. You need a outside entity to govern the sport, to govern the promoters, which is where the commissions have their duty, have their jurisdiction, and the job that we ask them to do. On top of that, obviously that system is not perfect. Commission heads are not elected officials. They are state-appointed officials. I think that should change. I think when we go to the ballot, we should be able to vote for commission heads. We should have more of a democratic process and voice into our regulation of our sport. Why? Because our taxpayer dollars do go to the commissions. It is a state agency. But yet we don't. And again, sort of switching back to what Andy Foster's saying, and he talks more about jurisdiction. Talks a little bit more about, in California, when it comes to differences between USADA and California punishments or suspensions, whatever it may be, California takes precedent in licensing. They have the jurisdiction. And as long as we have that conflict, as long as we have this conflict not only between a commission and regulatory bodies or testing agencies, but we have issues between commission heads themselves. I've talked about this before, about 4 years ago now, maybe 5 years ago now, the ABC had this huge meeting and commission heads walked out of the meeting. That's why we have different rule sets in different places for MMA, because of that. I don't know if a universal commission solves that. I think it does. But again, there needs to be a democratic process that we, the consumers, we, the fighters, we, the media, whoever we may be, have a voice in. Otherwise, promoters, commissions, sanction bodies, they will run unchecked. The only thing that will affect them is consumer backlash when we do not pay for what they want. The commission needs tax revenue from these fights. That's why a Canelo fight you will rarely see be called off by the commission. That's why the 6-month suspension was kind of shocking. That's why Floyd Mayweather got that TUE exemption. Everyone wants to make money, and they want to make money off of us. And we need to have, again, more of a authoritative role in this entire process as a consumer, as a citizen, under these commissions. Andy Foster talks about the fighters being under his jurisdiction. Commissions should be under our jurisdiction. Just being honest. Moving on to more news of the day. Jose Aldo, man, they're trying to do this guy dirty, man. R.I.P. Jose Aldo versus Renato Moicano, targeted for UFC on ESPN Plus 2, which is not ESPN Plus 2. It's the second UFC on Fox ESPN 2 card. When I first read that headline, I'm like, wait, is there an ESPN Plus 2 now? That really confused me. But anyways, I'm not too fond of this fight and matchup, I'm going to be honest. I think Jose Aldo's in that tricky situation where obviously he is skilled enough to still be a top 5, top 10 featherweight, of course, but clearly has slipped enough to where he can't get hurt, he can't get beaten, etc. Switching back a little bit, Jason, is anyone surprised shit is run like this? Corruption has built combat sports. All sports is what actually he corrected. Yeah, I agree, Jay. Jay is saying he loves this fight. I think it's a good fight for a variety of reasons, but I also think it's a bad fight for a variety of reasons. One, as a Jose Aldo fan, I'm worried about Jose Aldo's health. I just am. I'll be honest. But it's a clear potential passing of the torch moment for a Brazilian legend, for a Brazilian prospect. So I understand the matchmaking behind it. I totally understand it. As a Jose Aldo fan, I don't know if this was the fight I would have picked. It's just a dangerous one. And Jeremy Stephens, even though he beat Jeremy Stephens, he was hurt in that fight. He was clipped in that fight. Renato Moicano, even though he isn't the greatest striker in the world, still is a pretty sound striker. And I think if he's able to stay at range, use his height, his reach, this could be a very dangerous fight for Jose Aldo. Well, hopefully we see a return to form in some way. I don't know. But, again, Jose Aldo's in that weird stage in his career where you're expecting that fight to happen, where it's clear as day this guy just doesn't have it anymore. And, the Max Holloway fight in a way showed that, but this could show it in a much different light, a much harsher light. And, again, just as a fan, I'm purely talking as a fan here, taking the media hat off for a second, purely as a fan of Jose Aldo, a guy that I remember him coming up I remember when he had hair and he was a nobody as a debut in the WEC, seeing him fight, going, I need to find all of his fights in Brazil on YouTube right now. And being just amazed by this guy. Seeing that UFC title reign, which was, the third best title reign in UFC history, arguably. Just behind, maybe fourth, actually. Third, fourth, one of those. It depends where you think John Jones and him compare. Because obviously Anderson Silva, Demetrius Johnson, and then you have Aldo and John Jones. Aldo is still potentially a top 5 fighter of all time. Jay is saying that's why he loves it. It's the passing the torch moment. It's important in combat sports. It is important. So that's why, again, I don't hate it. I'm just, again, I'm worried. I'm worried for my man Aldo, man. This is one of those fights where we could definitely tell how shot Aldo is from this. Much more so than the Jeremy Stevens fight, in my opinion. More news of the day. Sad news. Again, Dominick Cruz. God damn it. Dominick Cruz injured. His fight with John Lineker is canceled. I know this headline says in jeopardy, but the fight is canceled. Dominick Cruz is not fighting John Lineker. I said this. I think I was talking to Jason Burgos of Showdown.com on Twitter. Shout out to Jason and Anthony Walker over at the Trenches podcast. Go check them out. Showdown.com on YouTube and obviously podcast form. Great guys. Talking to them about, talking to Jason particularly about Dominick Cruz and the injury and just how sad it is. And on top of that, he's a guy that equally has a what-if career. What if Dominick Cruz had an extra 3 to 4 years he lost due to injuries and surgeries, and he had another 8 fights, 10 fights under his belt? What if? What if his reign at bantamweight could have been better than John Jones, Demetrius Johnson, and Anderson Silva? What if? But we don't know because of the injuries. But on top of that, he still, I think, has the easiest claim for the greatest bantamweight of all time. Right? Definitely let me know in the chat what people think. I know Jay might have either a strong opinion about that or indifference, but I think Dominick Cruz equally is one of the biggest what-ifs in MMA and also the greatest bantamweight in history, which goes to show how great of a talent Dominick Cruz is and how unfortunate it is that we haven't really been able to see him 100% in his prime like we want, like he wants, like MMA deserves. I was thinking of parallels. I think Jason was bringing up parallels. I sort of forget the ones we brought up. I'll be honest. Sorry. But I think there isn't a parallel we really have with Dominick Cruz and arguably all of sports. Because, we have what ifs. We have big what ifs all across sports. We do. But what ifs are also still potential GOATs. Like that. That doesn't really exist. That paradoxical dynamic of a fighter's legacy just really is hard to hit. Like, it's hard to get that dynamic in your legacy. You either are one or the other. You either are a great fighter, one of the greats of all time, one of the greats, so to speak, right? Or you're a what if. And he's both. Just weird. It is. It's unfortunate. the legacy of Dominick Cruz. One of the oddest and still one of the greatest legacies in combat sports, arguably. A guy that his style, his techniques that he displayed evolved the entire sport. You see Dominick Cruz's influences everywhere. Everywhere. We just saw it last weekend with Max Holloway. You know, Jay definitely agreeing with me. Thank you, Jay. I'm glad we're on the same wavelength here, saying prime Dominick Cruz was revolutionary in MMA. Absolutely agree with that. You know, it's funny. He came at a time when there was a bunch of revolutionary fighters. We don't think about it, but that 2010, 2013 range, right? We saw the rise of John Jones, a revolutionary fighter. We saw the rise of Cain Velasquez, a revolutionary fighter. We saw the rise of Dominick Cruz, a revolutionary fighter. You know, on top of that, you know, towards the end of that sort of time span, we saw the beginnings of other revolutionary fighters like a Ronda Rousey, like a Conor McGregor, for example. It's just, again, the history books of MMA are obviously not written yet. It's 25 years old. But the history books are going to have a interesting time to talk about Dominick Cruz and revolutionary figures in that time era. Again, you know, sort of stitching back to the topic on Fox, right? The positives and negatives of the Fox era. Whether it's an indirect correlation or a direct correlation, within the Fox era, we had the rise of Dominick Cruz, John Jones, Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, Cain Velasquez. You know, those 5 fighters alone revolutionized the game more so than any other time in history, other than the very inception of the sport. I think at no other time in history do we see so many revolutionary figures in the sport until the beginning of the Fox era. Again, maybe I'm wrong about that. Definitely, I probably have somebody debating in the comment section later on when they watch this video or listen on podcasts going, man, Matt's high as shit. Potentially. I mean, definitely call in 323-870-4051. Press 1 to get in the queue or leave that comment below with what your thoughts about this. You know, do we have another time in MMA history where we had so many revolutionary figures at the same time? I don't know. And we clearly don't have it right now, I would argue. Not in the same way. Like Max Holloway, Israel Adesanya, who else? Tito Dillashaw in his own way. They're all, in my opinion, it's the right sort of word. It's almost like a DLC, like a video game DLC. Like they're great, but it's an addition to. It's not a changing of the game. It's not a new game. It's not a new paradigm with these guys. Even though they're all great fighters, all have arguably better skills than the previous generation, but it's just different. You know, the footwork of a guy like Dominick Cruz has been emulated by everyone since. Even TJ Dillashaw. That's why it's more of an addition to. John Jones, his creativity in the clinch, his creativity on the ground, that has not really been matched in any way since. So, again, interesting to see what the next current crop of revolutionary figures in the sport are. Moving on to our last news of the day as it's pulling up. And speaking of bantamweights in the bantamweight division, since it has to move on, Jamie Rivera versus Aljamain Sterling booked for the UFC on ESPN debut. Love this fight. Absolutely love this fight. I'm not going to really make a pick yet or dissect it, but I absolutely like it. I think it's a fun fight. Though I will say, Aljamain Sterling has seemed to be a little bit erratic on social media. Kind of a concern in a way. But yeah, I love the fight. Love the matchup. Jay is saying, watching Cruz from then, and he still looks more versed than fighters now. And MMA now, technology-wise, is developing fast as fuck. I'm assuming you mean like training methods. Like just look at the UFC PI Institute. I think that's what he's referring to in terms of technology. But also, I mean, the way Dominick Cruz moved, the way he looked, not everyone can do that and do it for 5 rounds. Like that, it takes a special athlete. It just does. He put his body to the limit, honestly, doing what he did. The way he moved, how fast he moved, how much he moved for all 5 rounds. I mean, like, fighters can't do that. Their limbs can't, sustain that. And plus the 8-week, 10-week training camp, and outside training camp workouts, that's just a lot on your joints. I'm not surprised that Cruz got injured so much, to be honest. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. Smash the like button, share the show, subscribe. If you missed anything, go back to the beginning. Catch it all. UFC on Fox 31. Bellator, Brett Primus versus Michael Chandler 2. UFC 233 being canceled. Dana White versus Oscar De La Hoya. God, I don't want that. And remember, the Dana White myth needs to be exterminated. Guy gets way too much praise for doing nothing but being a puppet. Nothing but being the front man. And that means very little in my book. But anyways, I'm Matt, the Hipster Hunter. You can find me at Matt Hunter, MCR, all platforms. Smash the like button, share the show, subscribe. If you listen on podcast form, drop that 5-star review and write the review so I can read it on the show. And also patreon.com/Mixed Combat Radio. Go over there. $1 a month, $3 a month, whatever it is. You get extra shows per week. You get tons of more content. And we're only adding to it. So get in now. Grandfather yourself in at that $1 tier before we get more content. Have to actually bump it up a little bit. Jay is saying, I think if you were to compare MMA to boxing progression-wise, MMA is in the 70s and 60s. So like boxing, like 1885 to 1960 and 70s. Is what MMA has done in 25 years, I think is what Jay is saying. I like it. I'm not going to disagree with it. And plus, God, the lightweight division right now in the UFC, God damn, it's so good. That is better than welterweight back in the day in the 70s and 80s. Let's be honest. Hot take of the day. And have a fantastic day. And see y'all tonight, tomorrow, wherever it is. The Boxing Voice, MCR. Wherever channel I'm on, you know where to find me. Have a great one. Peace.